Hey everyone, and welcome to this Explainer. Today we're embarking on a genuinely fascinating journey, right into the very foundation of human thought. You can think of this session as kind of like a masterclass on the mechanics of the mind. We aren't just going to look at what we know, but rather how we actually know what we claim to know. I mean, as a student of life, you hold thousands of beliefs about the world around you. But what separates a mere belief from actual justified knowledge? Well, that is exactly what we're going to unpack today, step by step, using some brilliant frameworks from our source material.
Right off the bat, I want to throw a radical thought experiment your way. Just consider this for a second. What if an incredibly powerful evil demon is feeding you all your conscious experiences right now? Ask yourself, are you truly reading these words? Or is some malicious entity just making you believe you are? How could you rule that out? And if you can't rule it out completely, what does that actually say about the whole concept of knowledge itself? This kind of radical skepticism is exactly where the philosophical method begins, by doubting and asking those really profound questions about our reality.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's the scaffolded roadmap we're going to conquer today. First, a welcome to epistemology, to define our terms. Then, we'll open up the philosopher's toolkit to see how these thinkers work. After that, we'll look at 2 ways of knowing, break down 3 types of knowledge, and finally, we'll culminate with the ultimate goal, the nature of truth.
Let's transition smoothly into our first section here and lay down the foundational groundwork for the entire explainer.
I know the word epistemology might sound a bit intimidating at first, but it actually breaks down beautifully. It's derived from the Greek words episteme, which means knowledge, and logos, meaning the study of, so very simply, it's the study of knowledge. But it goes a lot deeper than that, encompassing justification and truth as well. And here's something absolutely crucial to understand. Humans inherently desire knowledge. We really don't like being proven wrong. Because knowledge is so incredibly valuable, epistemology is what we call a normative discipline. Think of it like a doctor prescribing medicine rather than just diagnosing a symptom. It doesn't just describe how we form beliefs, it literally prescribes the proper healthy ways we ought to form them to avoid being wrong.
Now that we have a handle on what epistemology is, we're going to shift gears to Section 2, the philosopher's toolkit. How do they actually dissect human understanding?
Picture a conceptual workbench in your mind. These are basically the 4 primary tools philosophers use to investigate concepts and build solutions. We have arguments, which offer structured reasons to support a conclusion. We have conceptual analysis, where we take big ideas like truth and break them down to find their essential conditions. We also have counterexamples, which are specific cases designed to show a flaw in a definition. And finally, empirical research, pulling real-world data from psychology, sociology, and the hard sciences to really ground these debates in reality.
And this brilliantly illustrates how philosophers actually structure an argument. Notice how the logic flows, step by step, linking an abstract concept to a real-world sociological concern. It starts broad with premise 1. Testimonial injustice occurs when opinions are unfairly treated as untrustworthy. Then, it introduces a specific scenario. If women's testimony in court is less likely to be believed, well, it's unfair. And finally, it arrives at the logical conclusion. Therefore, this is a case of testimonial injustice. It's a precise, step-by-step structure that philosophers use to prescribe how we ought to treat people fairly.
Now let's look at another tool, the counterexample method. Some folks argue that certainty is an absolute requirement for knowledge. Like, if you aren't completely certain, you literally don't know it. But let's test that out. Imagine I'm looking out my office window right now, and I believe there's a bird on the branch. It's a true belief, and I trust my vision. But is it possible I'm hallucinating? Sure. Could it be a really convincing fake decoy bird? Absolutely. So I definitely lack absolute certainty. But if there really is a real bird sitting there, most of us would agree I still know there's a bird on the branch. This thought experiment acts as a counterexample, completely defeating the idea that absolute certainty is a necessary condition for knowledge.
Moving right along to Section 3, 2 ways of knowing. We're directing our focus now to the actual sources of our knowledge.
So, our minds generally acquire knowledge in 2 totally distinct ways, and contrasting these is pretty vital for your understanding. First up, we have a priori knowledge. This is knowledge you can gain using reason alone, completely independent of physical experience. If I ask you what 4 times 2 is, you instantly deduce that it's 8 just by thinking about the concepts of numbers. On the flip side, we have a posteriori knowledge. This one is empirical. It completely relies on sense perception, experience, and observation. You can't just sit in a dark room and logically deduce that there's a bird on the branch outside. You actually have to physically go look.
All right, having established where knowledge comes from, let's guide you to the next conceptual layer in Section 4,
3 types of knowledge.
Think of this table as a quick syllabus overview for our categories of thought. Philosophers basically categorize everything we know into 3 distinct buckets. First is propositional knowledge, which deals with facts and statements. Second is procedural knowledge, which is all about your know-how in executing tasks. And third is knowledge by acquaintance, meaning your direct perceptual experience of the world. Let's walk through each of these right now.
Let's kick it off with propositional knowledge. You often hear philosophers call this knowledge that. It involves declarative sentences that are either definitively true or false. Knowing that the Earth is round, or knowing that Nairobi is the capital of Kenya. Traditional epistemology spends the vast majority of its time analyzing this specific bucket of factual knowledge. And as we just learned, this propositional knowledge can be either a priori, like math, or a posteriori, like measuring your own height.
So the crucial point here is that knowing facts is entirely different from actually having a skill. And that brings us to procedural knowledge, or your know-how. Take the classic bicycle analogy. You could have a brilliant physicist who knows all the propositional facts about cycling. They know the exact equations for centrifugal force, forward momentum, friction, the whole shebang. But if you put them on a bicycle, they might immediately fall right over. Having the factual, declarative knowledge of the physics just does not guarantee you possess the procedural knowledge to actually execute the physical task.
And our final category is knowledge by acquaintance. British philosopher Bertrand Russell famously articulated this with his idea of sense data. This is knowledge you get from direct experience without any stepwise logical inference. A perfect example is feeling physical pain. When you stub your toe, you don't pause and logically deduce, my nervous system is firing, therefore I must be in pain. No way. You just feel it. You are directly acquainted with it. Now, if you logically infer that something sharp is causing my pain, well, you've just crossed back over into propositional knowledge. Acquaintance is just the raw, direct awareness itself.
And here we are at Section 5, the nature of truth. We've talked about how we gain knowledge, but what does it actually mean when we claim a belief is true?
You hear people today say things like, well, that's just their truth. But in epistemology, truth really isn't relative. A proposition is simply either true or false. Aristotle hit the nail on the head when he said, a true statement simply says of something that it is what it is. Building on that, we have the correspondence theory of truth. This foundational theory proposes that a statement is true if, and literally only if, it perfectly corresponds to a specific state of affairs in reality. It makes truth a direct relationship between the words we speak and the actual physical world we inhabit.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it takes this lofty philosophical concept and grounds it into a simple, relatable, everyday mental picture. Take the statement, the dog is under the bed. Under the correspondence theory, you don't get to just decide if that's true based on your feelings or vibes. For that statement to be true, reality has to meet 3 strict conditions. First, a dog must actually exist. Second, a bed must actually exist. And third, the physical relationship between them must be that the dog is underneath the bed. If reality aligns with the statement, boom, we have truth. It corresponds perfectly.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a Socratic challenge to take into your everyday life. Think of a core belief you hold right now. Maybe it's a political stance, a scientific assumption, or even a belief about a friend. Based on the rigorous tools we've covered today, propositions, experience, empirical research, and correspondence to reality, do you actually know it? And more importantly, how can you justify that it is unequivocally true? Challenge your own assumptions, use that philosopher's toolkit, and never stop seeking true knowledge. Thanks so much.